Hello and welcome back to the Crafty Corner. This week at the Funkie Junkie, we're going to be creating to the theme of de-stressing with distress. Now, distress could take multiple meanings. We could be using traditional distress products by Tim Holtz, or we could be going old school and doing paper distressing. In other words, roughing up paper or giving something a more vintage look. Today, I'm going to be exploring distress products such as distress paint, distress crayons, distress sprays, and distress spray micas, and of course some distress ink. But I'm also going to be doing some traditional paper distressing. Now, the challenge at the Funkie Junkie is going to be running from August 25th through August 21st. We hope that you're going to join in the fun, and I hope to see all of your fantastic entries over at the Funkie Junkie blog. So, go ahead and pause to find out exactly what supplies you'll need for this upcoming card tutorial. All right, let's head over to the Crafty Corner. Today, we're going to be looking at distress spray stains and distress spray stain micas. We're going to play with some of these new micas today. And for good measure, we're going to throw in a little bit of distress oxide sprays. Now, to use these sprays, we're going to be using 3 different substrates. We're going to be using heavy stock mixed media, the white heavy stock, and we're going to be using some of the black alcohol ink cardstock. Now, these substrates are all from the Ranger line by Tim Holtz. So let's go ahead and get started. To start with, we're going to be using a splat box, and with the splat box, I will be using the distress sprayer, as well as a handful of paper towels. With the splat box, I have lined it with some paper towel, and this is going to help catch some of the mess. So let's start with the heavy mixed media cardstock. Now, for the mixed media cardstock, we're going to be playing with leaf colors. I'm going to start by adding a little bit of water to the paper. Then let's add in some mustard seed, then a dash of crackling campfire, a bit of spiced marmalade, and a touch of candied apple. Okay, and I will drip a little bit more water onto this, and then we will go in with the heat tool. Now I'm going to add a few more water droplets over the top. For the water droplets, I am giving the trigger on the distress sprayer just a small half squeeze in order to get larger droplets of water to fall. Okay, and I'm going to dry this off again. To make sure that this dries evenly and a little bit quicker, I'm going to be lifting up the paper so that I have better air circulation. Now, let's add some of the Distress Mica Spray Stain. Now, with the Distress Spray Stain micas, you need to give them a good shake because there's sediment at the bottom of the bottle. That's where all of the shininess is. So you want to give it an extra good shake to make sure you're going to be spritzing with sparkle. Okay, now as I look at the bottom of the bottle, I can see that sediment is gone. So I know that this is ready to spray. And here I'm doing little half squeezes in order to get some larger speckles. And let's take a closer look. And there you can see some of the shininess. I absolutely love this color. It's really, really pretty. Okay, well, I'm just going to set this aside and let it dry. And now let's move on to our next background. For the next colors set I want to focus more on browns, reds, and oranges. And for that, I'm going to be using some of the Distress Heavy White cardstock. So again, I'm going to start by spritzing the substrate. And I'm going to grab some festive berries. A bit of crackling campfire. Ooh. And I also want some of the crackling campfire oxide. And this one, we also need to shake it up before spraying. Just a dash of wild honey. This one's also an oxide. Okay, we'll spritz that. Get a little bit of color movement going. And I'm just going to move this around a little bit to try to get the color moving. And I'm going to gently dab off the edges where I'm getting a little bit of congealed color. And now, let's get this dried off. Now, let's add a few water droplets and a dash of crooked broomstick and maybe a little bit of jack-o'-lantern. So while I'm spritzing, I'm going to be shaking these two in the other hand. Okay, not quite. These need a little bit more shaking. All right, that looks pretty good. And let's add some crooked broomstick. Ooh, wow, that color is pretty intense. Neat. And a dash of jack-o'-lantern. Oh, that seems to have gotten a little drippy. That's okay. Just splatter that on. All right, now let's dry this. Wow, the mica shine on this is absolutely amazing. This is going to look spectacular when it's die cut. Okay, I'm seriously mesmerized by the shine of this. The jack-o'-lantern glows like embers, and the crooked broomstick, it looks so dark and mysterious. Okay, I'm gonna be good and set this aside, and we're gonna move on to our next piece. So for the next piece, we're going to be using some of the black alcohol ink cardstock, and we're going to change our color palette again and use blues and purples. And I know the Hocus Pocus with a dash of bubbling cauldron will also look spectacular. Okay, now we're going to be using some of the Distress Alcohol Ink black cardstock. For this, we're going to be changing it up a bit. We're going to be using Distress Oxides instead of Distress Spray Stains. We're going to want something that has a pigment in it because the pigment is going to show up better on here than a stain. So we're going to pull out our oxides and combine them with our Distress Mica Spray Stains. Now for the mica spray stains, I'm going to be using a touch of Hocus Pocus and a bit of bubbling cauldron. Let's start shaking. Okay, these look pretty good. Let's start spritzing. So again, I'm going to be adding some water first. And I'm going to put down a light layer of oxides. Ooh, that looks great. Okay. Now we're just going to quickly dry this off. Now let's add our mica spray stains. I'm going to start with some Hocus Pocus over the top. Ooh. That looks good. And let's go in with a touch of Bubbling Cauldron. Okay, add a little bit of water. And we will heat set this. Okay. Ooh. That looks really cool over the oxide. That looks pretty neat. That is super shimmery. I am loving this color combination. Okay, let's start making some cards. To start with, we're going to be using this background that we made using some distress spray. Now, we're going to take the stack of oak leaves that I made that have been created with the new Tim Holtz 3D oak leaf impresslet. And these, we're going to distress them a bit with some distress crayon. I'm going to be taking some ground espresso distress crayon and I'm going to scribble just a little bit on the top of this first leaf. And then I'm just taking my finger, I'm going to rub that in so that we can highlight some of that wonderful detail on the leaf. And we'll do the same part down here. Okay, and let's do the same thing with this little one. Good. And I'm going to add just a little bit to these two lighter leaves. Again, scribble on a little bit of distress and smush it in. Okay, so the leaves are done. Now we're going to set those aside for the moment and we're going to be stamping with some Distress Black Archival ink. This background is great, but it needs a little bit more visual interest. And to do that, I'm going to be using the stamp set Field Notes, CMS 396. I'm going to pull a few stamps from here and we're going to add them to the background. And I have a convenient stamping block on the side. And we will also grab our large Distress Archival Black Soot ink pad. Just grab that, stamp on a bit of ink, and we're going to add a few points of visual interest. I don't really have a plan for the stamping, it's just going to be kind of spontaneous. Okay, that looks good. And now for a couple of little numbers. Okay, and our background already looks better. Now let's add our oak leaves. So these I kind of want to use to make a bit of a border around the word sentiments that we're going to be using. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm going to glue these down and then I will cut off the remaining pieces on the edges. So let's add our sentiment next. I decided to turn this one into a thank you card. Okay, that looks pretty good. And the last thing that I'm going to do is add a little bit of distress around the edge of the card. And to do that, I'm going to be using a bit of ground espresso. For blending, I like to use the dome foam. I find that the rounded foam makes it easier to do a soft blend around the edges of cards. Okay, that is looking really good. Now before I trim off those leaf bits, I want to go in with a splatter brush and add some gold speckles over the card. I think that's going to really tie together our fall leaves. So to do that, we need the splat brush, and I'm going to use a dash of tarnished brass. So I've just put a little bit of tarnished brass over to the side, and I'm going to pick it up with the splat brush. There we go. We don't need a lot. Now I'm just going to hold this and just drop on a few speckles here and there. Okay. Let's see how that looks. Oh yeah, I'm liking how the speckles dropped on there. That looks really good. Okay, we're gonna set this card aside for the moment and we'll work on our second card. Then I'll come back and trim off the edges. For the next card, we're going to be working with a different type of distress, not a distress ink, not a distress crayon or marker, but we're going to use this little tool as a paper distresser. It's got a teeny little blade in there that allows us to rough up the edges of our paper. So I'm going to take this. This is another one of our backgrounds that we were working on, and I'm just going to chew up the edges. Okay, and now we have a nice roughed up edge. Next, we're going to add a little bit of distress paint to this background. This is the new Tim Holtz 3D folder foliage. And we're going to add just a touch of gold distress paint to this. And to do that, I'm going to be pulling out the distress brayer. Off to the side, I have a little bit of distress paint, and we're going to use that to add some touches of gold to our card. So just slightly rolling this back and forth. And now we're going to gently and quickly roll this onto the card front. And we're just trying to catch those little raised ridges. Okay. That looks really good. All right. Now I'm going to take this part and we're going to add a few pieces of foam. And then I'm going to take a medallion piece from the new Tim Holtz switchlet, and we're going to add touches of gold distress paint around the edges. And this is going to be a landing spot for our thank you sentiment. Okay, now I'm going to grab some vellum tape and quickly attach that. Now let's add our sentiment. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm just going to take the mounting foam off the back, the little release sheets, and we'll stick it on to the main card face. And the last piece that we need to add to this card is a little golden oak leaf, and we're just going to stick that right down here. And to do that, I'm going to want some more collage medium. Now let's come back to this card. We just need to trim off the edges. There we go. And here are two finished cards using multiple methods of distress. We have distressed with paint, distress crayon, distress ink, distress sprays and oxides, distress mica sprays and oxides, and we have done some traditional distressing by roughing up the edge of our card. Thank you so much for joining me today here at the Crafty Corner. I hope that you'll enjoy playing along to the theme of de-stressing with distress. And don't forget, you can enter the Funkie Junkie Challenge over at the Funkie Junkie Blog. You can enter by Instagram or by inputting a photo from your personal blog. I cannot wait to see all of your fantastic creations. And until next time, happy crafting!